We do have more than half the members and we do have a quorum. So if you want to wait a little bit longer, I'll defer to the chair.
Sorry, I flipped to another page and then I was on mute. I think we give a couple more minutes just because I don't know if people are mixed up or now traveling to their offices rather than their home offices rather than the county. So let's just wait another minute or two. I think we have a little time tonight anyway. We getting anybody else signing in? Linda, are you seeing? No. Well, I say let's just go ahead and hopefully we'll have some more people jumping in as we're moving. So I understand we have a quorum. I just want to confirm that. Linda, can you confirm that?
Yeah, do have a quorum, and I just got an email from Jen Mallow that she's going to be late. She's still in a Board of Ed meeting, which probably means Dan Lubley is as well, because he probably sits in on this, even though he's with the public school system. And I don't know if you wanted to text Paul Glykoff. I know he was planning on attending. I'm not sure if signals got mixed up because he asked if it was hybrid or virtual, and I meant to say virtual, but I said hybrid. So
Hang on, I'll see what I can find out.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
hi, Xavier. Good evening.
Nope.
It's here. I'm sorry for any mix-up I might have had. I meant to say virtual and I told you hybrid, and I apologize. I meant we weren't going to be in person is what I meant.
All right, now I know we have a quorum. So
Yes, we do.
that said, let's call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. This is our committee meeting number 11. We'll start with the approval of the agenda for this evening. I think everybody has that in front of them. Let me make sure that everybody's on the same page. Can I have a motion to approve that agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve.
And a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So the agenda is approved. And then a motion to approve the video of the minutes that, or I'm sorry, of the the minutes of the last meeting, which has been posted. Again, if I can have a motion to approve those minutes, which is posted online.
So moved.
I'll make a motion to approve.
And I'll take that as the second. So all in favor, aye.
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 Any nays? So that's approved too. All right, so Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think now, as of this afternoon, you actually have 100% participation in the survey, which is great. And I know you scrambled a little bit to incorporate as much as you could into your presentation, but I'll turn it over to you and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Well, good evening, everyone. And thank you too for the pivot from in-person/hybrid to completely virtual. Again, I wasn't sure what the weather was going to bring this evening. Earlier weather reports that we received said we were probably going to have freezing rain earlier in the evening. So I wanted to just err on the side of caution and not have us sit in a meeting room and have freezing rain outside our door. So that being said, I sent out the survey last week. I did receive a couple of responses Monday and today. So given the nature of some of the questions, I wasn't able to incorporate everything into the analysis, but I was able to incorporate some of the findings and some of the responses into tonight's presentation. But we asked 5 questions of committee members. The first question was, are the current APFO regulations, and it was a multiple choice, about right, too relaxed, or too restrictive? The second question was, are there any elements in the current APFO that you believe should remain unchanged? And that was the allocation chart test, the school capacity test, or the roads test. And those are the 3 main tests that we have within our APFO. The next question was, and these were harder to incorporate because SurveyMonkey, we don't have the paid version that does the analytics of non-multiple choice questions. So those were things I had to pull out and decipher kind of on my own. And when you have multiple response answers with everyone answering something differently, it takes a little bit of time to sift through that. But what do you think are the 3 highest priority issues that this committee should address in its recommendations to update APFO? And we'll go over those and kind of how I bucketed things. And again, I took some liberties and kind of interpreting what I thought the committee responses were and put those in various buckets. And we can go over that. I also sent you all the detailed survey replies. So I just basically went into SurveyMonkey and exported the responses to you for each of the 15 responses. So we can also go over that in more detail. Question 4 is, please share any recommendations to address the issues above in question 2. Your recommendations will provide a starting place for the committee deliberations. And then question number 5 is, finally, should there be an additional APFO test? So now moving into the survey results. So are the current APFO regulations, are they about right, too relaxed, and too restrictive? So I updated this as of this afternoon, and the responses were 50%. So half of the respondents thought they were too restrictive. And then the next second highest was just about right. And then the third highest response was too relaxed. And we can have discussion, obviously, after we go through all of the responses. Are there any elements in the current APFO that you believe should remain unchanged? And again, this question was updated as of this afternoon. And so the biggest one that everyone thought should remain unchanged is the roads test. And that was just shy of 80% of the responses felt that test should just kind of remain as it is. The next was the allocations chart. And that's if you recall, in Hilka by Design, we have the allocations of the number of units. So that's kind of the first test. Do we have units for the different areas, the different geographies that we have? And then we also have it by certain typology, like affordable units. Green neighborhoods is an old one, but we had the green neighborhood at one point in time. We used to give out units for that as incentives to develop those types of units. And then the school capacity adequacy percentage. And that was the third lowest that should remain unchanged. Now, question 3 was what do you think are the three, oops, sorry. I'm trying to read this. The three highest priority issues that this committee should address in its APFO recommendations. So again, because not everyone, it wasn't a pull down, it wasn't a multiple choice, everyone kind of put their own answers in. So I kind of had to, use some judgment calls of what I thought the different buckets were of the answers. So I kind of grouped them into what seemed like the bin wait time, how long projects that did not meet the adequacy standards for schools, they were in closed school districts, had to wait prior to moving on to construction. There was a lot of questions, comments, concerns about maybe budgeting, funding, fee structure, making accommodations for affordable housing and MIHU type of housing, concerns, discussions about the school capacity test, and then this like big bucket of other, where there wasn't multiple different recommendations or priority issues of more than one thing. It just seemed to kind of fall into this other category. So I just kind of tallied up the results. So the other's kind of an outlier because those were like one-offs of various other things. So obviously that was the highest ranking issue, and there's 14 of those. And on the next slide, I list out what are those others. But really, the school capacity test was the highest priority issue that this body should address. And obviously, we know that's the issue. Obviously, making some type of room or accommodation for affordable housing and moderate income housing units. Thinking about how this affects budgeting. Do we want to do some type of fee structure to address APFO concerns? And do we also want to look at, and again, I'm inferring from some of the responses because they were not written in such a way that was always easy to discern what someone was saying, but I'm assuming, do we want to lengthen the wait time? Do we want to shorten the wait time? Do we want to maybe have something happen while these developments are in the bin during the wait time? Should schools be moving forward with capital project while these developments are in the bin, so to speak? So I think there's some clarification or discussion that can be had by what is meant by this waiting period. So what was in the other? So one response was shortening the wait time between review boards. I'm assuming that's meaning, we had this, you're the first APFO committee that was codified to occur after the adoption of the general plan. And that seems to have been the rhythm after past general plans, but this is the first time it was asked to be stood up. Obviously, Montgomery County is on a regular cycle. Every few years, they stand up a new APFO committee and they adjust the APFO based on kind of real time what's happening in their jurisdiction. I'm assuming maybe that's the same thing that this person was recommending on our committee is, do we want to convene every couple of years? Hey, is it time for an adjustment? Are we, too restrictive, not restrictive enough? Are we just right? Should we be having conversations? Another comment was APFO is not responsible for implementing the general plan. Comprehensive rezoning is, and APFO is supposed to pace whatever development is planned. Another comment was infill development, minor subdivisions. Maybe, I guess I'm assuming that APFO adequacy requirements should be exempt from that. Minor subdivision should be exempt from that. I don't know, I'm reading into this. I'm assuming from our discussions. I believe deferred maintenance should be high on the list of priorities, whether in schools or critical infrastructure within the county. Broaden APFO scope to budgeting and allocation of resources, adding thresholds to APFO tests, accurate calculation of mitigation rates, frequency of committee submissions, and maybe that's similar to shortening the time between review boards. I'm not 100% sure, but that kind of seems similar. Ensuring housing and growth goals of state of Ahoko by design are met while adding the needed public facilities to support growth. Ensuring outflow does not preclude state contributions to school backlog. Allocations chart test. Other facilities such as hospitals, parks and recreation, regional variation, and roads test. So that was what comprised the other, and I just didn't know kind of what bin of these bins that, or buckets, I should say, fell under. And we can go back and have discussions and revisit all of these things based on your thoughts that you're seeing this. So then question 5 was, should there be another outflow test? And 5 respondents said yes, 3 said no, 2 said maybe, and 3 people skipped or said other. And other was someone said we should add a water and sewer test, but we already have a water and sewer adequacy test. So I kind of put that in the other category. And then there was another test added, but we kind of had that test too. So I wasn't sure what to do with those. So kind of put that into the other category as well. And then those possible additions were that fire and EMS, doing something similar to or akin to what Montgomery County does, adding a transportation multimodal test, or looking at other facilities for possible additions. So kind of going back to this slide, like where you're saying, what other tests should we add? These are the other suggested tests to be added out of that response. So just some observations that the majority of responses that outflow is too restrictive, and that question 5, and the additional test added, this reaffirms that most responses being no, maybe, or even skipped. And then in question 2, majority of the responses was for the road test to remain unchanged. However, when asked for an additional test, was for a transportation or my multimodal test was listed as the test to be added. So I guess a little more explanation of kind of almost like those were a little conflicting. So I guess kind of maybe having some discussion if that test were to remain unchanged, but that was the additional multimodal test to be added, kind of maybe explaining how those two would work together. So that's really the survey results. Again, the last 2 results that came in Monday and today were not included in the responses to question 3, 4, and 5. So, and question 3 results are in your packets. So that was in the PDF that was sent to you. So those are all over the place. So, you know, those are some things that we can just, if you want to dive into specifically, because those are, you know, all individual responses. So I'll lead off with having Todd, if you want to start the conversation with the survey.
Well, I just want to kind of open it up. I had an issue with question 2. I think it was a little flawed in that you didn't have the option to answer more than one of them. So anybody who wanted to say they should all remain unchanged couldn't. You had to pick just one. So I think that was a little short-sighted on the way it was structured, just because I think it might have been more interesting to see how many people chose more than one. But I think it does pretty strongly reflect that as a group, we think that the roads test is kind of doing its job, and probably doesn't need a lot of look because it's being reviewed in the development process, and developers are being asked to make the improvements that are necessary as a result of their project. Now, I would defer a little bit if Antoine wants to jump in on this issue, because I know, Antoine, you're pretty actively interested in multimodal and bike lanes and so forth. And I don't know if you think that needs to go specifically into the roads test and be a portion of that, or if you think that perhaps should be a separate question or a separate test. So I don't know if you want to jump in and comment there.
I've got my hand raised for half of this answer. I'm going to have to come back and I'm going to keep my hand raised. So I think Lisa was ahead of me and she might have had a survey comment that's similar. But a multimodal test or adding other layers of modal access or mobility access to the road test would be the right thing to do. Does that, reflecting the other question, make it more restrictive? Probably not. But in the mindset of the changing demographics of our county, it may very well be the right case that the roads test does get tweaked to account for, at least when we're thinking of areas around our activity centers, that adding walkability or multimodal use would probably be advantageous to the road test. It wouldn't be another test. We don't have the kind of density and anywhere in Howard County to make that a separate test, but certainly it could be tweaked.
Antoine, though, would that be appropriate for APFO, or does our Complete Streets handle that?
So it's funny you mentioned that. The nice thing about Howard County's implementation of Complete Streets is that it focuses, the road test in APFO could be focused towards it without hurdle, without judgment, I should say. It's a little of both. I don't want to say it's separate because doing a roads test, indiscriminate object, would be us trying to pay attention for moving people around safely, comfortably, equitably, and that would qualify / benefit us for our Complete Streets goals.
And just for everybody's benefit, the purpose of tonight is to kind of figure out what our starting point is. We're not trying to resolve any issues tonight. We're just trying to know what is on the table and what we need to be thinking about as a group. So let's not get over focused on things tonight and trying to resolve them and trying to take it down to a high, very granular level of detail. But it's just a matter of kind of understanding where we might be starting from. So, anybody else on the roads test? Any thoughts? No.
Hey, Todd, it's Brent. I had my hand up.
I'm sorry. And just so you know, I can't see hands. So, Linda, jump in if you can see them. Don't be shy.
I know I talk a lot.
So it's
during these
Brent,
things.
and then, well, actually, I think Lisa's hand was up first, if you don't mind, Brent.
Absolutely, let her.
Yeah, so
Please.
Lisa, then Brent.
Oh, I don't mind because it wasn't about roads, but I just had a quick question, and I know I could probably just count this up myself, but Linda, you probably know off the top of your head. You had said that 50% said that APFO was too restrictive, which I guess meant the other 50% said it was right or too relaxed. But then later in the summary, it said majority said too restrictive. So I was curious, how many people, I guess, because there's an odd number, like how many people said too restrictive? Was it 8?
It was, at least I can answer. It was
7.
It was 7 because one
Seven.
respondent skipped it.
Yep.
So
Okay.
That's correct. One
we only had
skipped.
14. Even though we had 15 surveys come back, that question was only answered by 14.
That is correct.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to write down, I was curious what the number was because in the summary you said the majority said too restrictive, but it sounds like it was
Well, I
half-
was saying majority,
half.
well, if you looked at majority said, well, 50% said too restrictive, and then some said just about right, and
Yeah.
then only a few said, like 20-ish% said too relaxed.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And all of the pure numbers are in the most recent survey that you were sent this afternoon, which had all 15 respondents that came in.
Got it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I think Antoine pointed something out that's important for all of us to recall is that there are nuances in these answers. And I mean, I don't know who's who in this, but you might well say, I think ABFO is too restrictive, meaning we need to relax it a little bit, while at the same time saying, I think we need to add another test, or we need to add elements of another test to meet some objectives. So I don't think they're mutually contradictory. I think, though, that that first kind of threshold question is probably the most important one. And then there are nuances beneath that, even for people who think that the overall test is too restrictive. So, Brett, then I will go to you.
Thank you. And I'm just going to provide some high level feedback. We'll start with roads. I went to the transportation open house conveniently right next to my house in Laurel last week. And I was surprised, as well as I'm known in the community, I ran into Department of Public Works people that don't know me very well. And they gave me an interesting story of this interesting APFO committee and what they're doing. And they were very confident that a roads test was going to come out of the APFO committee. So I find it interesting that internal to the county, they have something in the works. But it's also unsurprising. They should be watching this, and they should be offering opportunities for improvement, be it within Complete Streets, APFO, or the combination thereof. The other thing is this survey, I did not share it with, but I did share many of the common questions among our PTA council earlier this week. And obviously, as expected, within an education crowd, they have very strong feelings, and they're almost completely united on those feelings. I would suspect if we did this poll for the general public, the results may be considerably different. And I would invite this to go out to the general public so we can get their response to this. But what we have here is a sampling of our membership as appointees of the committee. And we should take it as such, and it is constructive, and use it to move forward. But also be aware, there are a lot of parents, there are a lot of people in other groups, elderly and whatnot, that may have drastically different viewpoints than us as appointees to this. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I'm not sure, though, that if we gave this same question to our 15 members before our first meeting, that we would have anywhere near the same numbers that we have here. And I think it's because we've had the benefit now of 11 meetings and 20 some presentations that have given all of us data that we haven't had previously. And I think that would be definitely be true of the general public if they haven't had the benefit of those briefings and they haven't been engaged enough to follow along with us as we go. I agree with you. I think the general public's response would be vastly different than this. But I also think that our response from day one versus now would be vastly different because of what we've been exposed to. So I hear you. I don't know how we present it to the general public in any event, but I'm not sure that would add any value. I'm pretty sure I know where it would come back. And maybe that's the value if you're trying to build mass for a position, as opposed to make sure that everybody that's expressing an opinion has had the benefit of the briefings. So, with that said, I'll put it back to you, Brent, or defer back to the floor.
No, just wanted to make that point. I would appreciate if there was a general public component to this, and even on the simpler, higher level explanations. And all of our technical briefs have been available for the general public, as well as 10 years of history of releasing this information. So while there are surprisingly few that can rattle off every technical description, many can talk to the general concepts of overcrowding or bad traffic or inadequate fees, things of that nature. Thank you.
I see your finger, Antoine. Fire away.
Yeah, I'll be somewhat quick with this one. I agree with Brett in that there could have been a public component of the survey, slightly tweaked with the questions. And like, for example, this question here, I think someone mentioned that they didn't, it was mentioned that somebody didn't answer the question. And I was almost another person in that the the variability of the levels of the question. You couldn't get away from feeling that you had to answer one or the other. So there's probably a need for one or two other type of answers in there if this went to a public audience. But to your other point, Todd, this actually would have been a great survey for us to take after one of the first couple of meetings that we had, because in thinking of how do we look at what to focus on at this juncture, seeing the change of opinion as we have been educated, if you will, kind of the snapshot before, this is a snapshot before and a snapshot after, might have been just as instructive as we are getting it kind of in this one shot here. So that, to that end, helping us hear one another and how we've improved collectively. This, as an earlier survey, could have been pretty valuable in that. And then also to the public, them being able to chime in at some level. Maybe some of the later questions are a little too detailed and we don't want to get that much input, or maybe in lieu of a public meeting, they do this. But like this question and the second question probably would be really neat to hear from the public as a, well, how do they feel at this juncture? And that's as ample feedback for us on this committee.
Yeah, I think it's something that we should probably note for the next APFO committee, because I think it would help. It would help understand kind of where we were at the beginning and where we are now as a committee. I think that would be very helpful. And let me ask, of the members that are here now tonight, who feel like your perspective has been changed, do you want to jump into this conversation? If you feel like, hey, I thought this and I didn't realize that, and so my perspective has moved from about right to too restrictive, or too restrictive to about right, or somewhere in the middle. That would be really helpful to hear from any of you that feel able to do so. Nobody?
I'll say something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
John, that's great, because we always hear
I'll
from the
chime
same
in.
people,
I
so it'd be
mean-
good to hear other voices.
I mean, I had no opinion. I have no idea. This is all very new to me and very educational. So, I mean, I didn't have opinion about any of this prior to this APFO committee. So it's all very interesting, and it does create a lot of food for thought for my own personal experiences. And I know everyone obviously has some hidden agenda. I personally have no agenda, but listening to everything that we talk about week in, week out, and the same, obviously, there's a lot of things that are repetitive. I certainly am starting to form an opinion. So I think it is goes to your point that we are being educated, and the general public, which would have an opinion, I guess, but I've never thought 1 minute about any of this. And I am a public school teacher in Howard County of 30 years. So I do have a unique perspective. I'm not sure I agree with all of it, but I would say I'm forming opinions based on the information that I receive every week and the way that people respond. So I think it's extremely educational. But again, I came in with zero preconceived notions because I had no idea what this even was. And I was appointed by Dr. Ball. So I came in kind of a neutral slate, and again, I'm forming my own opinions based on the facts that I hear and the opinions that are expressed in this meeting. And even more so, was very intrigued by the public forum we had over here at the community center. I thought that was, again, just very interesting, very educational for me. So having no preconceived notions, I'm certainly starting to form an opinion now. I'm not exactly sure how this all gets resolved. I feel like there's a lot of different things and people pulling from different directions and personal agendas. So I'm curious to see how this all unfolds in terms of how we vote. It's very unique to me, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in there? That
Paul Gleichop has his
feel
hand up.
free
And if John, if you could put
Yeah.
your hand down, thanks.
Yeah, so similar to John, I came in this without any preconceived notions. One of the things that I would encourage, because I did take a chance after Linda sent out all the details, I'd encourage folks to read the 20 pages of survey responses. I actually took a different read on the priorities in question 3 and did my own bucketing. And I just categorized 17 of the respondents identified schools, and I'll say that generically, schools as being a priority issue. I read some of the time frame issues a little bit differently. I interpreted some of it as developers' time frame issues. So I had a bucket where I found 6 of the responses identified development process that included dollars and how long it takes to go through, or rather dollars and overall process issues, and another 6 that were development time issues. 2 were affordable housing and 2 were miscellaneous dollar issues. And then the others all fell into miscellaneous. But clearly the schools are top of mind for everyone, not only in the priorities, but in the tests as well. So, and that's clearly dominated this discussion for 12 meetings now, or 10 meetings, whatever it is. That's all I've got.
Anybody else want to jump in? No.
I guess I'll just say a couple
So,
things real
I'm
quick.
sorry, Aaron. Aaron and then Zadie.
So I also too, I came into this without any preconceived notions, although, I know some of us that are on this committee have had the experience of, severely overcrowded schools with our own children. And frankly, I'm still, someone that's experiencing that. And I understand that there are lots of different components to what we're thinking about when we're looking at the ATFO testing. And I think from my perspective, one of the things I'd like to bring out of this committee, and I'm not quite sure, how we get there just yet, but there are definitely pockets of the county that are significantly more overcrowded at the schools than other pockets of the county. And where, and particularly where I live, where, ATFO, the testing was failed by developments for years upon years. But once, the waiting period lapses, the houses get built and they exacerbate the overcrowding. And, we're looking at a school, again, where I live, where they're suggesting using portables for another 10 years into the future. And there's already been portables there for at least 5 years. And, again, from the reporting that we've received, there's lots of portables being used all throughout the county. So, while I understand there's, a desire to develop more, and I fully, appreciate that, and I'm not opposed to that, I just think that there needs to be a way to, maybe there's a modification to the testing for the schools testing, but, how do we address kind of the pockets of the county where there is severe overcrowding in a way that's maybe more, that solves the problem, right, that ATFO is supposed to try to address.
Yeah, and I hear you, Aaron. I don't know if that's a real ATFO issue or a schools issue, like that they're just not putting the capital into the school itself, right? Like, I think we could hold off and hold off and hold off, but if the school system isn't doing anything to improve the school, then to me, it becomes, is it a schools issue or is it a development issue? To me, it almost seems like it's a schools issue. Like, are they not putting the resources to the school? Because it doesn't seem to be changing. I don't know. I don't.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've got that, and I know
Yeah.
in looking at some of the survey data, and this is maybe something else that has to be considered, but there's significant deferred maintenance, and I guess there's not only are there seats issues in pockets of the county, but there's significant deferred maintenance, and I understand that some of the deferred maintenance is, things aren't broke, so they don't need to be fixed, but there are also, I think, facilities that are kind of past useful lives and have kind of real, significant issues. So
Absolutely.
I
And that's
don't
not this
know.
committee's charge, unfortunately. I mean, that's just not our problem to solve. I'm not trying to sound harsh about it, but that's that really is a school system issue. I don't know how we as a committee move forward with that.
then
Or
why,
it's our
if,
charge,
if
it's not
it's
even our
not,
charge to
I
pay
mean,
for it.
I guess if it's not, then there wouldn't be a schools test, right, at all, if it was not something that APSO should be looking at, right?
Well,
That's
we
my,
should be looking at deferred maintenance. I mean, that's their money to spend. That's their budget to spend. That's not a development issue, deferred maintenance.
but seats, how about seats in the schools? I mean, at some point, you know, when you're going to have portables at a school for more than 15 years and that's the plan, I guess I just don't.
Absolutely, but some of those seats could also be attributed to turnover. So without building another house, those seats could be filled without a house being built.
No, I get that, but then, I
Yeah,
mean,
and I know,
the talk
I'm
of
not trying to be
relaxing
confrontational.
testing that you could add more housing into an area that already has overcrowded schools. I mean, that's right. Isn't that why we're here, to address those types of issues? Or that's what APFO is there for.
Yeah, no, Aaron, and I think you're exactly right. A couple things. One, with respect to the schools, and this comes from the spending affordability side, but they made a presentation to us just last week or the week prior. I'm not sure, but the school's budget has gone up by 30% in the last 5 years, and they're requesting another 6.5% this year. Obviously, in an environment where we've actually had a slight decline in the number of students enrolled. Where it becomes interesting, specific to your point, is in that 6.5% increase on top of the 30% increase over the last 5 years. They specifically say that deferred maintenance is not on their list at all for this year. So I guess to Linda's point, this is an allocation decision, an allocation of resources decision that's being made by the schools that's wholly independent of APFO. And in many regards, it's independent of the county completely, because it's coming over, the budget comes over from the schools pretty well complete, and then is voted on by the council. But and I know Lisa would have a much greater appreciation for that exact process, and probably Brent as well. But the point is that the whole purpose of APFO is to give the schools as much as 5 years to make decisions on how to deal with overcrowding in the schools. And thinking back to, I think it was Dan's presentation, or perhaps Tim's, early on in our process, he said when a school is crowded, there's 3 remedies. One is redistricting, which Jen said was often, if not most of the time, a bridge too far, which I certainly understand. The second is brick and mortar construction, which is a protracted process and difficult because it has to go through a budget cycle, has to get approved, has to meet the threshold with the county and the state with respect to how it's going to be funded with borrowing. It's almost always borrowing because it's a long-term asset. And the third is portables. And what we found, I think, in our presentations is that the easy choice is portables, because redistricting is a total pain in the neck. Capital projects are difficult and protracted in time. So the schools tend to rely on the portables as a way of managing the crowding in the schools. But the whole purpose of APFO is to give them the time to make the hard decisions on how they're going to deal with it. And if they don't do it in 5 years, the question is, how long do they need? And I think when we start to look in more detail at the charts, when you see a school or an entire elementary region that's closed for 7 or 8 or 9 years, that's irresponsible. But that has nothing to do with APFO. That has to do with the schools making decisions on their resource allocations that don't solve that problem. So I don't know exactly what APFO can really do. All we can do is give them more time.
One of the things I thought we heard from Montgomery County was that if you were going to add more units in a closed area, even after the waiting period, that if there's a surcharge, those funds had to be used either at that facility or a facility immediately adjacent that would help alleviate the overcrowding in that. And I think that is something we could recommend,
Agreed.
as a potential. I get it that the school system has to, use the resources effectively as well, but
And
I
it's,
mean, I think we can recommend that there's changes to try to force the issue.
yeah, and Jeremy actually raised that in an earlier meeting, and I think he's spot on. When you ask a developer to make a payment of literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to reduce the pressure on the schools that are impacted in their development area, and then the money gets spent somewhere else, and the pressure isn't relieved at all in the area that it's going to, that doesn't seem right. So I think there's definitely room for us to make that recommendation. But it's not just the schools competing and the schools making resource choices. It's also the county making resource choices. Because when the county, for instance, needs a new prison for $30 million and they're limited to a $70 million ask for 1 year for bonding, their bonding authority, and the schools thought they might get a capital project, but they don't because the county has other needs. It gets very challenging. So it's within the school system, that's one, but it's also within the county where the school system is just one player in the county. So I think it's Xavier, we're trampling all over your time. So I'll
Yeah, it's
give it
Sabian's
back to you.
next.
Yeah.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I would like to point out first and foremost that I was one of the members who pretty much identified the resources going to a bucket for, just use by any school, that may or may not be impacted by development as an unfair practice. So just want to, put that out there. Going back to the initial question, I believe, I signed up to APFA not even knowing what APFA was when I was asked to pretty much, serve. And just listening to everyone, I know Brent was, saying we should probably have, feedback from the general public on some of the priorities. I think it's easy for us to assume that schools would be at the top. Most people tend to be a little bit, selfish in what their needs are and what their priorities are. And people who are, feeling like there is a problem that is, extremely challenging to them and they don't really have any way of personally solving it, those people tend to be more vocal. So I feel what would happen is if we should send, out the survey to the general public, you'd probably find that maybe 90% or more of the respondents would be saying schools should be high on the priority list. Now, I believe schools should definitely be on the priority list, no doubt about that. Looking at our projected age population, though, we do have decrease or a decline in ages, 5 through 19. So over the next, I believe the next over the next, maybe 3 or 4 years, it should be continuing to trend down, which could offer some alleviation to the overcrowded, schools that we're, having in the county. But I think we need to be more holistic with our views and not be so, tunnel vision onto what might just be impacting us directly. As a committee, I think it's, incumbent on us to have a more holistic view as to what the challenges are within the county and not just be self-interest or just be concerned more so with, issues that are directly impacting us.
Agreed. Thank you.
All right, Lisa's hand was up, and then John, your hand is up.
Okay, thanks. When Aaron was talking about wanting to discuss some school money needs and where money goes and how we should maybe make some opinions about that, I think we need to be really careful to not advise against those discussions because they're not in ABFO. There's a ton of things we've been discussing that are not in ABFO. I mean, the majority of the whole housing aspect of cost and supply and I mean, there's all kind of things that aren't in ABFO that we're talking about at great length and we care about ABFO having an effect on something else. And in our last task force, I want to remind everyone we had this area of recommendation where we recognized that we were making suggestions that were not necessarily exactly in the ABFO ordinance, but we felt that they were very relevant and affected by ABFO, and therefore we were going to go ahead. We even went so far as to recommend state action that we thought should be lobbied by our county people. It was pretty broad, and we felt like anything was on the table that would really affect what ABFO is going over, and not just the technical, exact, direct things that ABFO can control. And for instance, the last thing that Aaron said about that example of saying that monetary example of, hey, let's advise the fees go to the more crowded places. And of course, we've had a mild discussion about how sometimes the renovation priorities of schools isn't objective enough. What can the Board of Ed do to change some of that? I think that it makes a lot of sense for us to go there so that the developers' money that is being spent more wisely. I think that's something probably the majority of us would agree on. And so it would be great to address something that probably so many more of us can agree on than other topics. And lastly, I'll say that what I was originally going to say before wanting to respond to what Aaron's comments was for one of the changes for me that going into and then feeling different. When the Montgomery County people were talking, I know that they're easing up on certain ABFO type restriction, but they're also like charging these really big fees, even bigger than I thought or realized from the charts, especially with roads and things like that didn't seem predictable. A lot of people had a lot of questions that night. We're kind of really surprised by that. But one of the things I think we should talk about that they're doing is that exact thing that Jeremy was talking about too, that like, why can't they pay more in more crowded areas than less crowded areas? So all of these kind of aspects happen to tie together with what I was raising my hand about and had like a real cohesive foundation of we should be recommending financial things because they might not be direct, but they are important and indirect. Thank you.
I'm sorry, guys. Can I just jump in, Miss Linda? Linda, I'm sorry. So just to add, I do agree that ABFA should have some financial scope. Especially when it come on to school impact fees. We should be able to at least have some control over how those funds are being used, and it should only be used, specifically to ease in or dealing with any overcrowded situations that's in the school. So the money can only be used for that. It can be used to buy like school supplies, or well, maybe school supplies, but not like a tractor or something like that. And just to add to what I said earlier on, about the getting the feedback. We did have a couple of public hearings, and out of the public hearings, I believe a significant percentage. I would want to think over 70% of the people who testified in these hearings, they all pretty much had concerns related directly to school and overcrowding, school issues, zoning issues. But again, I think as a committee, we have to have eyes on the big picture and be more holistic in our approach. Because again, not knowing anything about ABFO, if I had received the survey, up front, I'm quite sure schools would be top of mind, because I'm not really so sure what's going on with other key infrastructure in the county. I'm not sure what's going on with our storm drains and how many of them are in disrepair or pretty much at the end of their shelf life. They're there's so many things that unless you have the information and you pretty much delve into it and get a holistic view as to what's going on in the county, only then I think that your feedback, and I'm not saying that nobody's feedback should be discredited or discounted at all, but I think that it's just that not having all that information and being able to make a thorough assessment as to what priorities should be, then it would be a lot of I think a lot of noise. So I think as committee members, I think again it's very important that we try to be holistic in our approach and not be tunnel vision.
Xavier, two things real quick. One, the enabling legislation for the school surcharges was state. It's a state enabling legislation that allowed for the school surcharge. That the use of those funds is limited to what's defined in that enabling legislation. So it can't go to a tractor or school supplies. It's supposed to be specifically for adding capacity to take pressure off. That's the whole point of it. So I'm not saying that I know necessarily that's exactly what's happened, but that was the intent. And the very short answer to a very good point you just made about storm sewers, it's between 150 million and $200 million. It's a huge number. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about in APFO. That's just maintenance that the county has. There's a national pollution discharge permit that the county has. It has to meet the standards. If it doesn't make the repairs in a timely manner, it can be subject to losing its permit, which would be disastrous for the county. So that's accumulating, and we're not making much progress there because that's also competing for capital funds, just like the schools are.
I think John had his hand up, and then Brent.
I realize what I'm going to say is not very popular, but again, I've been teaching at one Howard County school for the last 30 years, and there's such a negative connotation I hear towards the portables. I would tell you, having children who went to class in portables, and my colleagues and myself have never taught in a portable, but my colleagues are lining up to teach in the portable. So it sounds very negative, but why do my colleagues want to teach in there? So I don't see the extreme negativity towards them. Their classrooms, they're located on the campus. I realize that your children have to go outside, as do mine. But I mean, is that the end of the world, going outside and walking 25, 35 feet to a classroom? I mean, that's just life. We all have to make those sacrifices. But why are my colleagues lining up to get into that particular classroom? So, I mean, I know that may not be popular, and I don't have an experience there, but that is the reality of where I have been working, is that teachers want to teach in that portable for whatever reason. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks, John. And just so if you recall too, those are not allowed to be used in a capacity calculation. That's what we keep talking about. Okay, thanks. I think, Brent, are you still have your hand up or no?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
And then Vanessa was after that.
So a lot of things to respond to, but I'll try to keep it brief. To Todd's effect, he said exactly that. There's Maryland State legislation that deals with impact fees and where they go. That is one of the documents I provided for the APFO committee, which I encourage you to read very closely. It has all the fine details of how much we've collected and what it's been used for. And yes, there are exceptions, and exceptions are some of the things that erode the effectiveness of the capability. But the absolute genesis of APFO goes back to 1969, when somebody was told they had to put a bicycle path through their backyard in order to develop, and they had to pay impact fees. It actually was a transit sidewalk issue dealing with finances. And fast forward to now, there's an impression that we're using time as our only component of it. The mitigation fees are critical. They need to be accurate, they need to be appropriate, and they need to be able to fulfill their job to reach adequacy. And I get the school budget is all over the place, but keep in mind what we're dealing with in the auspices of this committee is just the adequacy of capacity. So that's the capital budget side of things and how they're fielded and whether they're sufficient. The rest of the budget is up to the school system to manage to their best and abilities. We just saw a document presented to us Monday showing roughly 50% of the infrastructure needs are actually being funded. Now, keep in mind, that's a mix of operating and capital, but you slice them out, it's still significant. And I'd like to comment to Xavier's comments. I obviously, the budget heavily lies on schools. They're a large chunk of the budget, large chunk of APFO current, hopefully a large portion of APFO future. But I also deeply care about our fire department, our public safety, our police, and even our water and sewer. It may be an APFO, but we did get a presentation saying we can only max it out to 80% of its capacity, and then we're up for a major infrastructure lift. And it would be ideal to get ahead of that rather than wait until we're right at the peak. And quite frankly, for those of you who love development, if you don't have water and sewer, nobody's moving ahead. That's how APFO started in 1990 with Liz Bobo. So please, let's take all capital budget items in consideration. They all affect each other, and consider how we can use APFO to get adequate public infrastructure, no more, no less, no side deals, and get it applied appropriately where it should be. Thank you.
Linda, you said Vanessa's next?
Vanessa's next.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to say two things. One, I like the conversation we're having about how we could possibly direct impact fees to the actual school or area that is being impacted, because to me, that's just logical. If a developer is paying money that's going to impact a local school or some other aspect, they're paying money to deal with the sidewalks, they're paying money to do all these other things that are impacted. So why does that money then not go to the school that's being impacted? That has not made sense to me prior to this process, and it still doesn't make sense to me now. So if we can speak to that and direct that, then to me, that would feel like we would have accomplished something. And I also agree that the school system and what they're doing with their money and the deferred maintenance for so many buildings is a huge problem that does and does not have to do with APFO. However, in this one particular issue, if we are deciding different recommendations for projects to move forward that then impact overcrowding in a school immediately near the project, then to me, that money should go to that school and not into a general pot to then be distributed in some other way over some large amount of time, where then the school that's impacted never sees a dime and continues to be overcrowded, which has happened in more than a few areas. Aaron referenced the same thing happening at his local school. So, and just to speak to the portables, I wonder if in older grades, it's less in high school, for example, and maybe even middle school, it's less of a problem than it would be for elementary school, because I personally have heard many parents talk about the concerns of their children with disabilities, the lack of bathrooms, in some cases, the lack of ventilation. There were CO2 problems in some of ours. And at Bryant Woods, the most overcapacity elementary school in the county that we now have heard of a number of times, there is no room to add more portables. There's no land. We can't actually do it. So we're currently at 130% overcapacity, and the portable solution is not really a solution. And I know that for the school itself has a lot of kids with disabilities and issues, that they have runners, they have a lot of things that the portables pose challenges with at the elementary level. So maybe for older grades, it's better. And that's why the teachers like it in high school, because they're out of the fray. But for elementary, I think it might be a little bit of a different impact. Thank you.
So thank you, Vanessa. So Todd, did we want to dive into question 3 or any more of the survey at all. And this was just kind of a temperature check for the committee. We still wanted to get through, I just wanted to tell everyone, kind of update them about the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act that came through last year and how that affects APFO. And then I know that Paul had a presentation he wanted to share with about an hour and a half of the meeting left. So I'm just wanting to give you a time check.
Yeah, no, I yeah, I've got it in front of me too, so I'm keeping an eye on it, and I think Paul probably needs 20 or 25 minutes, and plus Q&A time. Question 3, would you pop it back up?
Sure, I'll go ahead and share my screen. There we go. I'm sorry, it was question 4. Please share any recommendations to address the issues identified in question 2.
Let me just ask the members, for those of you who brought up points, do you want to jump in and bring them up now just to put them on the table? I mean, they're already on the table because they're in the surveys. So we will be addressing most, if not all, of these issues, either directly or indirectly as we go forward with our deliberations. But does anybody feel like they want to jump in and say anything about their response to the survey that needs to be on the table tonight? And if not, that's fine, because we'll be using these surveys to start crafting our strategy on how we tackle issues. But otherwise we can move on. At some point, I think 2 of our members have had the benefit of going through this before, and that's Brent and Lisa. And not only going through the process, but more importantly, going through the process, making recommendations, having the council then make decisions based on recommendations and the council's perspectives, and then seeing what happened with development as a result of the recommendations and the council's decisions, and obviously the executive as well. And at some point, I think we would all benefit from your open assessment of how you thought that process went and how you feel that the recommendations that you made and were implemented result in what you wanted, or was it overcooked, or was it undercooked? And I know that you're going to have your own perspectives, and that's fine. I just think it would be fascinating to hear your thoughts at some point on, hey, this really didn't go the way we thought, or this went way better than we thought, or we made all these recommendations and the council just kind of brushed them aside, or whatever your thoughts are. And I don't know that necessarily I'm asking you to do that now, because I think that's not really even fair. But I know that even if the committee at large doesn't want to hear that, I would love to hear it, because I think it'd be fascinating to get your perspective on that. So I'll say that and give you a minute to respond. And if it's something that you don't think would be beneficial, I'm fine with that too. But if either one of you wants to jump in, I love your perspective on whether you think that would be helpful or not.
It may be. So, first off, are we going to repeat the last APFO committee? That's kind of a we shall see. As it is, we're going through training. We're looking into topics. I think right what you're seeing here, one of the early things we did when we went into deliberations was throw out a whiteboard and we threw everything up. Then they started picking what are our top 3 or top 2 or top 1. The problem is that excluded a lot of very important items that did deserve consideration. For example, we had somebody who was representing special education. They couldn't come to the meetings, and therefore they got deprioritized forever until we're discussing it right now again. Will they get to be prioritized or talked about? We don't know. As far as the process, obviously we're coming in, we have our viewpoints. We're going to try to shape things the best we can based on those viewpoints. then we're going to kick it over to the council. And quite honestly, I encourage everyone to look at the original APFO bill, as well as that very weird midnight recancellation, re-legislation of APFO that we had during that time. And you can see probably 160 amendments were put in on those bills. So whatever we come out with, each council person is going to be putting a considerable amount of amendments to either strengthen or weaken particular areas. And then, of course, it goes to a final vote, it goes to legislation, and I will set the expectation. If you watch legislation close enough on this topic, you can see that APFO doesn't end at that point.
Yeah.
Each and every July, they consider it with the open close chart. Each and every budget cycle, all these items that we're discussing come up. And you should know this from spending affordability. Each and every budget cycle, we tell everyone everything's okay. We got the greatest county in the world. And then you look at each chief of each office come in to testify for the budget, and all of them are hurting when it's budget time. So there's clearly a disconnect there. And then finally, you can see the state is becoming much more involved in APFO and land use legislation that may override what we do. And you also see from time to time randomly introduced APFO bills to kind of tweak things, because we were supposed to meet every 5 years. That was the agreement. But due to the way they wrote it, these meetings have stretched out to a 9-year time frame. So we definitely could review certain things to see if they've reached their goals. That's me rambling on. I'll let Lisa give her impression there.
Thank you, Brent.
Thanks. I promise I'll be brief. I wouldn't mind having the opportunity to answer your question, Todd, in more depth, like especially regarding things that aren't opinions, like advice about logistics, debates, voting, how they handled it in process. I wouldn't mind. I'll go ahead and put together something, send it to you. You can send it out to the committee, just for factual references. And then just a quick opinion to answer your question. The differences I'm seeing from last time and this time are with the presentations of information, they're actually not that different. Like we're hearing almost a lot of the very same things. I think they're more true now than they were then. Like we've been out of land, for 20 years. Well, we really are almost out of land now. Like we really actually weren't back when they were saying that 10 years ago. So, as an example. But anyway, a lot of the same concerns existed then are more true now. And I would really like to go ahead and put together something. We all have to remember that, our advice and what we come up with in this committee is just going to be that. That's all it's going to be. It's going to be advice. It's going to be given to the council. The council is going to create, or the county executive will likely create a bill, and then the council will look at the bill, they'll amend the bill, there'll be a public hearing. It'll be an enormous, huge issue with the public hearing. It'll probably go 2-3 nights of testimony with 1 million people in there. And it's going to happen what's going to happen. You guys may or may not know that. I'll say in a very general way, and then I'll stop because we have to respect tonight's agenda. So I'm sorry. But last time, APFO recommendations were X. The APFO bill was Y. What got passed was Z. And none of them really looked a whole lot like each other at all. So just throwing that out there. So I will send you something, Todd. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Linda,
Yeah,
back to you.
forward to that.
Talk
Oh,
about
sorry.
housing, the Housing Act.
Paul, did you have a question still? Your hand's up.
Just a process suggestion, so that this whole discussion over the last 45 minutes isn't wasted. I don't know whether we have a parking lot somewhere, but there seemed to be fair consensus that a recommendation should involve funneling developers' fees to the schools that are affected by development. And if we could just park that somewhere so we don't have to deal with it again. And we know that when it comes time to make recommendations, I heard general consensus on that. So
Okay, so I will start a parking lot. So parking lot funneling
developer fees that are without taking into account whatever the legal prescriptions are for the state. But if there are developer fees that can be funneled to the schools that are affected that need capacity enhancement. And that's my layman's way of putting it.
Well, the only one thing we have to remember is, of course, that those school surcharge fees apply to every project in the county, not just the projects where there are closed schools.
Yeah, I don't know if we can do that because we don't have impact fees.
I'm not worried about the details at this point. I just want to get the concept down.
Agreed.
We can figure it out later.
Yep. Thank you. Yep. Okay, Linda, you want to talk about the Housing Act for a few minutes?
Jeffrey had a quick question. That's going to be the last question we'll take before we move on. Jeremy, I'm sorry, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, just quick comment, actually. So I've been kind of banging the drum that I'm a big supporter of Howard County considering this Montgomery County utilization premium payment model, as I've said in past meetings and as I wrote in my survey response. So appreciate some of you tonight pointing back to those comments of that I made. What I like about that is it helps ensure adequate public facilities by providing additional additive money to address capacity as opposed to time. My understanding of how the Montgomery County model worked is it would be no waiting period. So if the school's over capacity under that Montgomery County model, you don't wait, you just would have to pay more money with this additional fee. And that utilization premium payment, as I understand it, is additive in addition to Montgomery County school impact tax. So I think, like, to this conversation we're having now, if we were to recommend directing money to the specific school that's over capacity, it could be this. If we recommend moving to this Montgomery County utilization model, we could recommend that the utilization premium payment must go towards that specific school, whereas the normal school impact developer fees that that Howard County currently collects would still just go to that general pot. And like, one of the concerns I have, and like I really do want to defer to the school board to make those decisions on how they allocate and prioritize capital projects. But the concern I have is, if suddenly there was additional money available, if we were to shift APFO to this premium payment model, then the school system might be like, oh, well, we have this additional money, so we ourselves, through other county resources, don't have to put as much money towards capital projects because now there's this new source of revenue. And so I would want to ensure that if we were to adopt such an approach, that whatever new money came in would be additive in the future to whatever the county school board and county council and county government was already planning to contribute to school capital projects. And I think one way to do that is what we were just saying, ensure that any additional utilization premium payment is earmarked only for that particular area, because then it kind of puts a restriction that's like that may help mitigate or reduce the likelihood that other sources of money would not go to school capacity. So couple additional thoughts I just wanted to throw out there. Thanks.
No, great. Thank you so much. So I'll start a parking lot and I'll put that in there for tonight. And then we can each meeting add additional items to that parking lot list. Okay. So I don't want to take up too much time. Just wanted to inform you of a couple of things. So kind of going back to Brent's statement that yes, the state is coming in and usurping local land use authority. I do expect some APFO local land use changes, perhaps in this legislative session, who knows? But one of the ones I do want to make you aware of is the Housing Affordability and Expansion Act of 2024 that was signed into law, and I will tie in the APFO issues that happened with that here. I see Lisa squinting, so I'm going to make the whole screen bigger. Can you see that better? Sometimes when you do the full screen, then it's weird on my end too. So then I have a hard time seeing you all. So anyway, basically this was signed into law last year, but it just went into effect this January. And the law made considerable changes to the land use article, which is kind of the state legislation that overrides and gives us local jurisdictions the authority to apply charter and non-charter counties. And we're charter county, apply and gives us the authority to do some of our local land use regulations. So, key provisions of the bill. One of the things that this bill did was it preempted exclusionary zoning for manufactured and modular homes. So the name of the bill is the Housing Affordability and Expansion Act of 2024, or affectionately referred to as HB 538. And basically, one of the provisions is it said if you have single family residential zoning district, you cannot prohibit manufactured or modular homes being built in that zoning district, as long as it's going to be converted to real property. So basically, you can't discriminate by the housing typology. So if it's stick built, you can't discriminate to have a modular or manufactured home in a district that's single family residential. And again, the idea is that manufactured modular homes are less expensive to build because they can be built in a factory and on a tractor trailer, brought on site and pieced together on site instead of built on site and constructed more efficiently. And so it's cheaper, not as labor intensive on site. So it's a way to produce faster housing more affordably. And so this is just a map showing all of the residentially zoned properties in Howard County that are in our single family district. So where we cannot prohibit manufactured housing from being allowed in Howard County. So that was one of the provisions of the bill. And the hatched pattern are all the school districts boundaries that are closed in Howard County. So just keep that in mind. No increase in density or anything like that. It's just housing typology. So that was one aspect of this big bill that went through last year. The second part of the bill had to do with qualified projects. And these were projects that are located within 3/4 of a mile of an existing or planned passenger rail station. And these passenger rail stations are identified by Maryland Department of Transportation. And currently there are 5 affected areas within Howard County, and they're listed here. And basically these particular areas, we taken the property boundary of these stations, and I'll show you on a map. And then we measured 3/4 of a mile. So all properties, it has to be the entire property, not just a portion of the property, has to be within this boundary. And then once you're within this boundary, you get additional increased density but you have to provide at least 15% of your units have to be affordable dwelling units that are deed restricted for at least a 40-year period. So,
Linda?
Yes.
Is there a term of art in this legislation that defines what affordable housing is that is beneficial to our consideration? Because I don't know. I don't know what the definition of that is.
It's on the state legislation, yes.
So there is a definition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. It's I think 80% of AMI. 60. Would you say, Lisa?
60.
60% AMI.
In the bill, line 27 of the bill starts the definition of affordable.
Thank you.
It's pretty
Thanks.
strict.
Yeah, and so
thanks.
they lay it all out. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of all of that, but I'm going to give you the resources for all of it. This is just to kind of lay out like what the general gist of it is. Thank you, Lisa, for correcting me. But if you can see the yellow boundary, these are all of the areas within Howard County that are within the geographies of the transit-oriented development eligibility. Only the Dorsey Mark and I think the only Mark station proper that's within Howard County, maybe the Savage Mark. The rest are outside of Howard County, but their boundary goes within Howard County. The only Mark station that boundary that is not within a closed school district is St. Denis Mark Station, which is in Baltimore County. The reason that's important is because as of now, this Housing Expansion Affordability Act, when the bill was first written, APFO, it was exempt from APFO requirements. When the bill ended up being passed, they withdrew the APFO requirements. So right now, APFO is not, they have to still meet our schools tests and roads test adequacies. So right now, even if someone were to come in for one of these projects, even though the zoning regulations usurp local land use authority, they still have to meet APFO requirements. But the only open school district is up in the Elkridge area. And then the third provision of the bill are properties that are owned and controlled by a nonprofit. And so if your property is owned and controlled by a nonprofit and you can demonstrate that by having a licensed attorney in the state of Maryland, have proof that you're a 501c3, then the difference between the TOD and the owned and controlled is instead of 15%, you have to then have 25% of your units have to be deed restricted affordable for 40 years as opposed to 15% for that 40-year time frame. So, and this is just the map of what we know that under SDAT is owned by a 501c3. We don't know the control portion. You could partner with a 501c3 but be a for-profit company, but have a 501c3 as a controlling entity in your property. There's probably a lot of things, caveats that we just don't know about with this particular part of the bill for the non-profit component to it. So now, again, these are the hatched are all the closed school districts. So all of the open school districts, a property could come in and develop on those parcels at the increased densities over the base density. So what does that mean? In single family districts, you're allowed missing middle housing typology. So you can do, and in the definition, missing middle, they also include townhomes. So you can do duplexes, triplexes, quads, or townhomes. And the limitation is basically the carrying capacity of the property itself. So you would just come in as a developer with a site plan and whatever, you know, the property can hold after you reduce the environmental constraints and any, you know, other development constraints that you might need. You take out your septic, well and septic, your reserve areas, if you're out in the rural west, if you're in the Plan 6 area, you know, whatever you need, you know, for sidewalk and driveway and things like that. So whatever you can fit on that property. If you're in one of our multifamily districts, you get a 30% increase over the base density. And so you would see what your base zoning district is, then you would just add 30% to that, so you could develop up to 30% more. If you're in a non-residential district, you can get, and any of these can be mixed use districts. You can get our highest residential district, which I believe is our CAC district, to develop residentially on MB mixed, whoops, sorry, I did not mean for that to happen. Our highest residential use district, and have a mixed use component to it also. Same with our other mixed use districts, you can get a 30% increase over our over our base density districts. So what does this mean? It means you get increased base densities in order to achieve more housing and have that affordability component to it for a fixed amount of time for 40 years. So as of now, as you can see from the maps, we only have the Elkridge area that is eligible based on our closed schools for now. So I'm not sure what the state is going to be putting forward for this year, if they're going to be amending any of that. But I just wanted to make you aware, these are some of the things that that's happening from the state, make you aware of this legislation. Right now, it does not affect HAPFO, but we have the state law that is not being implemented because of APFO requirements. So, one more thing to throw into the mix, this could be a consideration as you can consider APFO. Would you want to look at lowering adequacies within the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act TOD areas, let's say, or if it's one of these qualified projects within our nonprofit ownership or own and control areas that they don't need to meet the school adequacy requirements to help move forward this Housing Affordability Expansion Act. So I'm just making you aware that this is state legislation that came through. We're not able to really participate fully because of the closures in the majority of the areas in which the geographically where this takes place. So just some more food for thought. Currently, some implications at our current code for MIHU and LIHU, even though we exempt those from meeting APFO requirements of passing the schools test, it's really a moot point, because when someone comes in with a project, and we have 15 and 20%, depending on what zoning district you are, of requirements for MIHU, no one's going to do 20% of their project and build that first and then put the rest in the WAPN. You can't do it. That's not how development happens. When someone comes in with a development, they're going to have to put the whole project in the WAPN, and those MIHU and LIHU projects are going to have to wait too, because you put in a site plan at one time. And so you get to technically complete, then you put your whole project on hold. You're not going to build just a couple, 1 to 2 or 4 units, depending on how big your development is. And if it's multifamily, you can't just build a fraction of your multifamily building because your plan is on hold. You can't finish your plan without having your whole school be opened. It can't be, let's process the plan and then put the plan on hold. That goes into the bin. So it's a moot point for our current code where we say we allow MIHU and LIHU to move forward. And the only other way that special projects move forward is if they are special projects that are, the LIHTC types of projects that, meet a really special criteria that these special affordable housing projects can move forward through a council process. So I just wanted to let you all know that as well, just for information. So I see Brent has his hand up.
I'll be rare and quick. How does phasing factor in? It usually deals with housing allocation units, but it has been insinuated that it also could apply to schools for large projects.
What do you mean by phasing? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
If Mr. Brano is online, typically we're told if a project exceeds its number of unit allocations or other criteria, it can be phased over multiple years, which literally is the definition of building things at different timelines.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is if you have a 20 unit subdivision and your MIHU you had to meet 10%, then that's 2 units. then those two
Obviously,
units.
the design would factor in whether that's a viable option.
Right, but and we're not really going to have these hundreds of units any longer. I mean, we just aren't really being built for those big, huge developments any longer. We don't have the land capacity for that. So Jeff, if you want to elaborate a little longer about the phasing.
Yeah, no, I think your point makes sense. So I guess Brent, your question is, if a project phases, then they could phase the MIHU allocations first and then build the rest. Is that kind of what you were thinking, or
It can be market rate or MIHU.
Right.
Just the
Yeah.
project as
Okay.
it is advantageous to the developer.
Yeah, I mean, typically phasing only occurs for very large projects that they phase for market reasons. They're not going to build 300 units at once. They'll build, 100 units a year.
Right.
Or and if the allocations aren't available in a given year, then we call it forced phasing. They're forced to phase into the future years in order to grab future year allocations. So that is allowed, although that hasn't been an issue lately because, as we showed before, allocations hasn't been an issue. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is, we're not getting those really big projects any longer to really do that phasing. And so when you're talking, most of our projects coming in, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, are maybe 10, 20 at most. And then some of the multifamily, maybe a couple hundred units. But
Right.
even in those projects, when you're talking a couple hundred units at 20% MIHU.
Yeah, it's like 20
Yeah.
MIHUs. So yeah, when the last AFO committee recommended that MIHUs be exempt, the intent was to basically promote affordable housing, but it really hasn't had much of a material effect because if you need, let's say you have 10 MIHUs in a 100-unit apartment complex, the project only needs 90 allocations, but it still can't move forward, as Linda said, because of closed schools. So I guess conceivably the thinking was that it would make more allocations available for more market rate projects. But because we haven't had an allocation issue lately, it really hasn't impacted things all that much.
Right, so it's almost you're letting perfect get in the way of good, and we're not getting even these types of projects to move forward. They're just all being held up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think the intention was good, but in practicality, it didn't have much of an
And
effect.
we do have the kind of enterprise model, the 60-40 split that you have listed right in front of you here, which allows a council exemption.
Right. Yeah, that's a second.
That's a really heavy lift. So that's, you have to have a lot of government assistance. You have to have, we're whole or in part of state or federal grant funded. So you're not going to really have that market rate component to it either. So like the last one we did was Patuxent Commons on that front.
Yeah, that's always been a bit of a curiosity when you do a 60-40 split or a 10-15 or whatever. Do the market rates, because they're paired with an affordable housing project, get exempted from the unit counts as well as schools tests? Or is it divided? Market rates may be affected and the percentage allocated to MIHU isn't. I doubt that's the case. I would assume that you're bundling these, but that does bring up a point. We could have a considerable amount of market rates coming on as well in crowded areas.
Right. Yeah, it is bundled. So the whole project moves forward with county council approval. There's been 4 of those that have happened. And of course, the intent is that these tax credits that the state distributes are very competitive, and it's a great opportunity to have a tax credit project in your community so affordable housing can be built. And so it's this trade-off of, having a project be on hold and losing the tax credit opportunity because of the school crowding versus allowing it to move forward despite it being in a closed school district. So it's not an easy decision, and the requirement for the county council to review this and make their decision includes a pretty detailed analysis of the impact of the particular project on schools. So there's a lot of discussion on, how many units, what is is the school really overcrowded or is it barely overcrowded? And it also requires us to look at the adjacent school districts, because if the adjacent school districts have capacity, then that's a consideration too, because there could be a potential redistricting. So the county council really looks at this in quite a lot of detail before making their decision, because it's not an easy decision.
And I understand you don't want to miss the opportunity, especially if it's state or federally funded, with timelines associated with it.
Right.
But it also comes down to, do we trade off overcrowding, and can we mitigate it some other way?
Exactly.
Because you'll always exempt something for a good cause. That's good politics. But on the other end of the equation, you have a local school district that receives the impact of that, and how.
Right. And you definitely want to try to solve the problem as best as you can, but it is a trade-off that needs to be looked at. Yeah.
Thank you.
Having done 4 or 5 tax credit projects in other jurisdictions in the state, the key is just the amount of time that it takes to get through the process, and not the APFO wait time, but locking up the property, doing the design, getting local approvals. Then you go with your whole plan and you go through the rating and ranking process. You may or may not get it the first year. You're starting to hold on to the land for the second year. And we do this with usually a local nonprofits. And you're trying to hold on for the next round, for the next rating and ranking process. And it can drag on forever. And the whole time you're trying to hang on to your control of the land. It's just extremely difficult. And if you add 2 or 3 or 4 years of APFO to it, I would venture to say it gets darn near impossible to do. So I think it goes to your point, Jeff, of the council having to ultimately make its determinations as to how to proceed, and whether there should be some sort of APFO exemption because of that timeline, which can be so long it doesn't work.
And I would proffer that if we just do not have the resources for this, this is a potential use case for making APFO stronger elsewhere to accommodate or offset the impacts of these well-meaning and well-intentioned projects. Thank you.
I think Aaron had his hand up, and then Lisa.
I just had a quick question. So the maps that are part of this presentation, where you've got the check mark for closed school districts, is that 2027? So that's based off of the current?
Yeah, it's the most recent maps.
Yep. Okay. So this is if someone comes in today with a project in those areas, they would fail the schools test.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And the reason it's 2027 is because it's based on the chart that was adopted in July of 2024.
Yeah.
And it's the first year in the chart is 27 because it's 3 years before the units show up on the ground.
Yeah, I was okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Linda, unless you have something else or there's another hand up, what a great transition.
I just wanted to just give you all a little background and just some more food for thought. I mean, I know this stuff gets really complex. And again, I don't want to pit affordable housing, against schools, but I think it's also good to know that, we do have a lot of competing interest, and housing and affordable housing is one of those interests too, that we are, desperate in Howard County as well. And so, Lucy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. For those interested in this House Bill 538 that was passed last year, on page 8, line 27, they define the qualified projects to which all these things will give things like extra density and all, and they define affordability as 60%.
Thank you. Yeah.
And also the 30% of that income, pricing wise, for rent or paying for housing, is in there as well. I think it's actually stricter than what Howard County is doing in APFO with the exemptions.
Yeah. And the
So,
turning point, the key
but
to
I do think it's
housing-
good.
yeah.
I think it's good. I even supported this bill. I think it's great that they defined it really well, and I think it's a good talking point for later for, you know, talking about possible exemptions. So, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And good. I think it's a turning, go to Department of Housing Community Development, State DHCD, turning point, key to housing success. That's their cheat sheet for us to use. So, all right, that's all I had. So I'm just going to go ahead and I think Paul wanted to share some information with you all as well.
Yeah, a good transition. Aaron's question about the charts. So I'll kind of introduce Paul and how he got here, but then turn it over to him completely. And I don't know if you recall the state presentation to our committee back in November, where the state was talking about state rated capacity and local rated capacity. And Paul had a couple of questions anyway that kind of turned him into the SRC, LRC investigator. And he's really dived in, and you'll see in this presentation, it's a really deep dive, and the amount of data that he's compiled, 10 years of source data for each of 78 schools, both SRC and LRC. So huge amount of information, huge amount of work. And with that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you to go with it.
All right, thanks. Linda, are you going to drive a presentation, or shall I share my screen? Hello? Am I unmuted?
No, you're there. You're
Okay.
there. She may have stepped out. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Let me try and share my screen, and we'll see what happens. Select a tab. Window. Let's try this one. Let me know if you can see my screen.
You got it. You're good.
Okay. So thanks for the intro, Todd. Just a quick intro. As Todd said, back in meeting 3, we had Tim Rogers, I think, from the public schools, present to us about school capacity, and he shared some data. Then in meeting 5, we got a document that was some of the backup documentation about school capacity, which is the document Jeff referred to a few minutes ago, the May 2024 school capacities APFO chart. And then in meeting 8, we had the gentleman from the State Department of Planning who told us about state rated capacity. After that, I went back and I looked at the state rated capacity presentation and dug into the documents shared with us on meeting 5, and just started scratching my head because frankly, I didn't get school capacity. And so today, my objective is simply to stir some thinking as we begin to make some recommendations for our final report to the council and the county executive to, as you folks have said before, do what they will with it. Maybe that's nothing. Why am I doing this? I have no particular qualifications for this. As I said earlier, I came in with no preconceived notions. I sort of fought a similar battle for 20 years as the vice president of planning over at the hospital, where I was constantly trying to build more capacity in a community that was growing faster than we could keep up with. And many of you have had an experience in the hospital's emergency department to know what capacity challenges are. I know I certainly had it every day for 20 years with patient satisfaction or dissatisfaction surveys. So I get it. My own bias is coming in here. I'm not a developer. I no longer have any children in the Howard County Public Schools. Mine are grown and all gone away. I'm a taxpayer. And like all taxpayers, I'm concerned about the quality of life in this county. and only 70% of the taxpayers are like me in that they don't have kids in the Howard County school system as well. I do have a bias that if our community unnecessarily limits housing growth, the community itself will suffer overall. Look at Rust Belt communities that have faded away for many reasons. But that's not going to happen in Howard County, but I don't want to see it even come close. After 10 of these meetings, I'd like to see a fair and balanced approach to APFO. I think Xavier said it well earlier when he talked about we have to have a holistic approach to this. But to date, we've spent a tremendous amount of conversation on schools, but others have brought up, we just heard about affordable housing as an issue, housing capacity or housing stocks overall are an issue. So I come into this simply to hopefully stir some thinking, and I will not take any more than the 20 minutes that were allotted me, and I already started my timer. So we're going to get done quickly. With that said, I think Brent said early on, all of this is an equation, and percent capacity in the schools is an equation. In simple terms, it's butts and seats. When I was at the hospital, it was heads in beds, but the percent capacity is a simple equation of the actual student enrollment at each school divided by the total number of allowable seats. And I've simplified that to an equation of percent C equals E over S, enrollment over seats. With that said, the questions that I'd like to put in front of folks today, and I don't know that we have answers for them, but I'd like you to think about them given all of the volume of data that's been thrown at us for the last 10 meetings. Why is there a difference between local and state rated capacity? What's the difference? How does it impact APFO? And what options are available to us in terms of recommendations that we make given those differences? After the state rated capacity data was presented in meeting 8, I called Linda and I said, what's the difference? And why is local rated capacity different? And she cited, I don't have a specific reference, but at the time it was something to the effect of a local school board or school system has the ability to modify. So it's all legal and it's on the up and up. It's a black box to me. I have used as a source document this Howard County Public Schools submission dated May 9th, 2024. And we'll start with some data that comes from that. And we're just going to keep following through. So this, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this large because then you can see it better. This we saw in the second or third meeting, which is the projection of public school enrollment in Howard County, or the E in the equation, the numerator, over the next 8 or 9 years, and how that's changed since 2019 was far more aggressive than what actual projections are based upon the 2024, the green bar here. I think Xavier made the point earlier about overall population projections. And I think this is, while this isn't the actual indicator of enrollment in the schools, this trend really also speaks to the degree that the numerator of this equation, the enrollment, is a trend that this is going to follow over time. Granted, this bar, that green bar for 2040, is down below or at 60,000 from roughly 70,000 that it is today. But two compelling data points that say the number of kids in schools is going to go down. This slide and the next one you've seen before. This one is for elementary schools, and the next slide will be for middle and high schools. But you saw these in the meeting 3 presentation, and I'm not going to go into them in detail, but what you see are red numbers here. And these red numbers reflect schools that are constrained, and that's their term, which means that for development in those school districts, it's essentially closed at this point in time. It's the hashed lines that were in the map that Linda shared with us earlier. The projection.
What slide are you on, Paul? I'm sorry. We're still on.
Let me see what you. So, what do you see here? Tell me what you're seeing.
The total enrollment 2007 to 2023.
Slide number 5.
Yeah, number 5. Yeah.
You're still on slide number 5 on your screen.
All right, I'm going to go back to the other way to present then. Sorry.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
It didn't work. Sorry, I thought I was presenting the full screen, and apparently that doesn't work. What I referenced before was what Xavier talked about in terms of a declining population. This isn't the enrollment in the schools, but it speaks to a much longer term, carrying us out to 2040, decline of population between the ages of 5 and 19. Just a support to the prior slide about enrollment. Okay, hopefully now you can see slide 7. Can you see slide 7?
Yes.
Okay. Again, keeping on the numerator here, these are charts, this one and the next one, which reflects middle and high schools, were presented at the 3rd meeting we had. The small numbers here are the projections of capacity going out, and then they carry out into each year up to 2036. The red numbers that you see corresponding to, in this column here, are which schools are constrained, or in other words, closed to development as of the current school year. And as Jeff said earlier, these look ahead 3 years. So this is the current year that we're looking at in this column. And again, the source of this is the public schools APFO chart. Essentially, there's 14 elementary schools whose districts are closed to any kind of new housing construction at this time. Again, on the numerator of that equation. When you look at middle and high schools, same source document. There are 6, 7 middle schools that are closed to development in this current year. And you can see how the numbers change year to year. We're going to look at some summaries a little bit further down the line. So the next thing, which to me was what really piqued my interest, was what we didn't focus on in that 3rd meeting is the state-rated capacity that was described, process was described in detail to us in meeting 9 or meeting 8. And that's the denominator of this percent capacity equation. And what you see here is the excerpt directly from the chart. These same numbers are in this spreadsheet, which I just computed a difference. What is the difference between the local rated capacity here and the state rated capacity by school? Elementary schools here, middle schools here, high schools here. And what is that total up to in aggregate? And I highlighted Guilford Park High School because we don't have a state-rated capacity for it, and it skews numbers significantly, as you'll see down below. In total, the local rated capacity of the schools, again, for this current year is 57,715. If you look at the state rated capacity for the same schools, it's 58.8, or almost over 950 students difference. If we take out Guilford Park High School, where there is no state rated capacity for it, and just take that out completely of the equation, current totals are 56,000 for local rated capacity and 58.8, or 2,600 students difference, which equates to 5% difference in overall student capacity. So the supply is very different depending upon which lens you look through. What does that mean in terms of actual closed schools? I've blown up here looking at both the current year and next year, highlighting the constrained or closed schools by as defined by the current APFO rule. And what you can see here is that there are 14, and in this current year, 14 elementary schools that would be constrained under the current model. If we were under the state model, it would be 5 schools constrained. Next year, 17 elementary schools will be constrained. 5 would be constrained under if we use state rated capacity. Let me say, I'm not advocating using state rated capacity. I'm raising awareness of a data discrepancy, which I think we all need to be asking, why does this occur? With that said, I did the same thing for middle schools and high schools, and you can see the numbers here tell a very different story. Under the current local rated capacity, 6 middle schools are closed. Under the state capacity, it would be 4. Next year, it would be 6 and 6. And interestingly, in the high schools, there's currently no closed schools, nor would there be for the next 10 years under local rated capacity. But the state rated capacity would have 3 schools this year closed and 4 next. Again, I think that that's driven largely by the missing data for state rated capacity from Guilford Park High School, the new one. So looking out 10 years, thinking about that first chart we looked at, how many schools are going to be closed under local versus state rated capacity? This year, across all 3 categories, there's 20 schools closed under the local capacity, 12 under the state rated capacity. Not too different looking out into 2036. Simply, there's not a whole lot of change. It actually gets up and gets higher in these middle years and then drops back down almost to where we are today. Not a whole lot of change. And to me, that says what's being done about it, or is this simply what's happening? Converting those numbers into percentage of the total schools, what struck me is highlighting 1/3 of the elementary schools in the state, more than 1/3, are going to be closed permanently for the next 10 years. And if you look at 2029, 1/3 of all of the schools in the county, their areas are going to be closed to development. And, as you can anticipate, just thinking back to the map that Linda shared before, most of those closed areas are where people live and where housing is going to be built. Most of the unclosed areas are in the rural West. So I asked the questions in terms of are we resigning ourselves to no further development? And that concerns me. So what? And I think I just talked about all these things. 1/3 of the elementary schools will close. The state rated capacity is used by the state for any projects that require capital funding from the state. And the state rated capacity under certain conditions allows some housing growth that might be prohibited by APFO. A question in my mind in running through this is there some variation of capacity measures that we can consider? So what's being done about it? There's three remedies that were talked about earlier: redistricting, constructing new schools, and portables. This is an excerpt from the same report, which I mentioned at the top of the presentation. And it's the summary of the long-range master plan capital facilities planning. What you can see here are the projects that are on the books. Most of them are middle school projects. And you can see here how much of the funding has actually been appropriated. And I draw attention to that simply because of the budget constraints that we've all heard about from the state. I think we can only anticipate less dollars available from the state, but I'm no prognosticator on that. The other thing that I point out here to the point of portables is that there is indeed $11.5 million committed for portables, which is spread out over the next 10 years. And I found it intriguing to hear John Brown's comment earlier concerning some teachers' perspectives of portables. Again, my kids are out of school. My kids went through portables. They're still living, so that's good. But it's something that the money seems to be directed. So almost wrapping up, remedies in the elementary schools. A couple more data points pulled from that same initial report. You know, what is the master plan dollars dedicated to elementary schools? None are committed to the elementary schools over the next 10 years. We're actually going forward. This column here I found very interesting. What is the projected enrollment change in these for the next school year? You can see what those numbers are here. And this column in particular, what is the projected enrollment change driven by new construction? So going down to Hammond Elementary School, which is currently at 113% capacity, new construction is projected to add 22 students to that school, whereas overall enrollment is going to change by 23. That's the only, it's one of four with double-digit growth in students due to new construction. Most of the others are anywhere between 0 and 9 kids with growth due to new construction. Same data for the middle schools and high schools. Three ways to remedy it: redistricting, construction, and portables. This speaks to the new construction option. You can see what kinds of projections there are. Oops, I've almost lapsed my time. I've only got one more slide. 49 students are projected to be added due to new construction, 50 due to new construction in middle school, 31 due to new construction in high schools. You can see where the dollars are being spent to add capacity, new capacity, and what years those capacities are going to come online over the next 10 years. It's pretty limited. My takeaway on remedies, redistricting, there hasn't been any elementary school redistricting since 2020, and both parents and the Board of Ed, understandably, would rather not do it ever. New construction as a remedy, that's currently planned and funded, is going to have minimal impact on growth over the next 10 years. And that additional capacity is already reflected in the charts that you saw back on the third slide. And finally, on portables, there's a steady stream of funding for portables, but as we've all acknowledged, it adds 0 technical capacity to the schools. But that's the solution that the schools have chosen to use to add capacity. So to wrap up, all I got is a bunch of questions. I wish I had answers. But as we think about what we're going to propose, is there any additional explanation we can get from the schools for what is local rated capacity and why is it so different? Can we think about some variation of local and state as we look at the APFO schools test? You know, most people who responded to that survey that Linda sent out last week, schools are the issue. So we got to think creatively about it. Can we abandon the school test altogether? I don't know. Can we include some proportion of portables capacity in the test, since that seems to be the most consistent and the most funded capital investment that the schools are making in additional capacity? Can Linda and her team help us determine what other Maryland jurisdictions are doing with APFO as a school capacity measure? Do we want to recommend that the Board of Ed and the County Council reconcile local versus state capacity measures? And we're working with a different denominator in each of those. And finally, declining enrollment with slightly increasing capacity with no housing development, to me, bodes ill for the county. And how does redistricting fit into this? Again, no answers, more questions, but with all of the data that we've been handed, I couldn't let this one go, and hopefully it's been a little bit enlightening, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions as best I can.
So I see Brent's hand up.
Hello, thank you. Obviously, this is something I'm intimately familiar with. I'd like to lead with, you ask a teacher whether they can have a nice, quiet classroom away from everything. Obviously, they'll pick a portable. If you ask them, do you want something that actually has fire extinguishers and sprinklers and security from wind, fire, and other hazards, they would pick that too. So there's no shortage of teachers that may prefer portables over nothing, but there are much better options in permanent schools. But I'm going to go back around to state rated versus local. We can look at two different standards and go, what can net us more development, or what can net us better, safer, more adequate facilities for children. We're about to go through a multi-million-dollar resampling and checking of all the capacities in the schools. That's going to include all the recent class size increases. That in itself is going to be recalculated into the next round. You're going to see a lot of capacity availability popping up because of increased and higher class sizes that are being implemented. You also aren't seeing in these documents new zoning. You don't see the Columbia Gateway Plan, you don't see the missing middle housing, you don't see all the comp rezoning. There are going to be factors that will eventually increase the level of development and in turn, the need for capacity. Keep in mind, if you look at a comparison of state rated versus local capacity, you're going to see that it closes and it isn't universal. It isn't like state rated is universally different than local. They actually vary considerably. You're going to see some areas closing for development that weren't closed in that effort. And obviously, if we change the unit of measure, which we measure capacity, it is going to trigger all the tests for redistricting at the school level. And there will be additional redistricting just solely because of a capacity change going on through here. And I'd like to conclude with, it is very rare to see an exact accounting of how state rated versus local are calculated. But it is very clear from over the years of being involved with this. There are a lot of considerations, especially around core spaces, cafeterias, multi-purpose rooms, and especially classrooms. Under a state category, you could have very small classrooms that Howard County considers substandard, or closets even. So they have a little slightly different standard than the rest of the remaining communities. But if you do compare with like Anne Arundel County, who uses state capacity, they also have 100% capacity maximums across the board in their APFO. So I would really encourage a deep dive into what calculates these variations, but more importantly, what benefit does the county gain by changing a unit of measure? And will we change it back if it's to someone's advantage later on? Thank you.
Todd, you're next. But really quickly, just one thing to mention, I know we have these adequacies, but we also have the allocations. So we do have an interesting two-pronged approach in Howard County. So just keep that in mind. So we do have additional guardrails, and one that we're not even using because we have the adequacy. So, just something to think about, that this committee is also kind of charged with thinking about, are they needed or not needed? So I would challenge us to think, if we do change the thresholds in any direction, we still have this additional guardrail with the allocation tests, which also helps pace the growth and also geographically pace the growth as well. So, Todd.
Yeah, I was just wanted to add one thing, because the schools and actually the superintendent came and presented quite extensively to spending affordability, and this issue was one on the agenda. And I guess the net of it was that local rated capacity, just like state rated capacity, is represented to be formulaic. But it was made clear that it's formulaic and then they make adjustments. So to your question, Paul, I'm not sure that it's that easy to determine exactly how LRC is arrived at for a specific school, because although it's formulaic, they do then make adjustments based on an individual school. That does kind of lead to the question of, now the schools chart, which drives whether or not a project can be pursued without being on APFO hold, is now controlled. Both the numerator and the denominator of the chart is completely controlled by the schools. And I guess that's a little problematic, particularly if it's not purely formulaic, because I think it takes the authority away from the county-wide elected officials, the county council and the county executive, and that's an issue that's kind of close to my heart. I think those elected officials ultimately need to have the authority to make decisions, but for whatever reason, over a long period of time, that authority has been ceded away to the school system, and they now have both the numerator and the denominator, and that controls what the charts say and what can be developed.
So next is Jeremy. Jeremy, you're muted. Even though it says you're not muted, you must be unplugged.
I should be better now. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Sorry,
sure.
I have like a separate button on my headset that mutes and unmutes the headset, and I accidentally had it pressed. Okay, so I was just complimenting you, Paul, that, it's great that you put all this information together. Super impressive that you put it all into slides. I wanted to, and I've kind of done a similar exercise, just staring at all these numbers, although I didn't put it into a presentation. But one of the things is I've really dived into this local versus state capacity issue, just like you have, and really tried to look at the difference. And one of the biggest things that I have seen that explains such a discrepancy is local capacity is only in elementary school is only for students between K and 5th grade. It does not include preschool, and it does not include other special programs that that school may have. Whereas the state number includes the capacity in classrooms that are dedicated to preschool and other programs. So if you look at elementary schools and you see like a large discrepancy between the local and the state number capacity, it's likely explained because that school has a lot of space for preschool classes and other special programs. And so when you are looking at like your formula of percent capacity equals enrollment over seats, what I think, at least on the elementary school level, what I think a mistake you may be making is you are taking the enrollment of just K through 5th graders in any given elementary school and dividing it by, when you divide it by the state number, which also includes the capacity for all of those preschool classes and other special programs, and you're not comparing apples to, you're comparing apples to oranges, essentially. Like you would also have to make that comparison, you'd also have to take a state enrollment number, which includes all preschool students or students in special programs, to do a more reasonable comparison. So like I've always just, you get hung up on that because like one's including all these additional kids and the other's not, but it's just saying let's start using state numbers is not, you'd have to make a corresponding adjustment on enrollment to include all those additional students that the local numbers don't include. So I just wanted
acknowledgement. I'm sorry, let me finish and I'll ask a question.
No. You asked the question. I mean, I've looked at all the feasibility studies that like the school system puts out every year, and there's a whole explanation, several pages that explains that and talks to those differences between state and local capacity and how the one includes all the preschool and other programs and the state doesn't.
So is the local school, they're squeezing more programs into schools than they were built for, if you're talking about preschool programs?
No, so I think the local numbers, when you look at the local capacity and local enrollment, it's taking out of the capacity. So it's a lower capacity number because it's not counting all the space that is for those extra programs.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing two different ways. We have added more programs to the school in terms of preschool programs than the schools were built for.
Sorry, can I just say one thing? This is Vanessa. In the early 2000s, and Jen Mallow probably has information on this too, because she is on the board of education to chime in. Schools were modified to accommodate, I believe, kindergarten, but also the pre-K. But I'm not 100% sure on. I know our school has always had pre-K, and there's a major discrepancy between our current capacity at Bryant Woods versus the state's, almost around 200 kids. So that doesn't actually probably add up to, I mean, Jeremy, what you're saying is, I'm sure that contributes to the difference in the numbers, but in that meeting where the state came, I actually asked for them to break it down and really demystify why there is such a big difference. And I don't know if there was any follow-up from that, Linda, because I never heard an answer from the state, because they also didn't seem to know where that discrepancy was coming and how it could be so great for this one particular school. And there's a few other schools on the list that have a large discrepancy as well, and not quite as big as Bryant Woods. So that being said, the pre-K exists, and it's true that it is not factored into the local rated capacity numbers. So there's always going to be a difference between the state for that fact alone. And Paul, I mean, yes, the schools have these other programs that are possibly not being, like Jeremy said, factored into the state numbers. So it is very hard to compare the two. So if we were to use the state rated capacity to open up areas, I can say for one, and I said this in our last meeting, that our school would not function at the state rated capacity. It literally could not accommodate any more children, and that state rated capacity is slightly less than double what it's listed at as its regular capacity right now, the local rated capacity, sorry. So it's hard to know, and I would actually really like that information about how the state is actually calculating that number. And I would say the local rated capacity is more accurate, and people actually know how the building is being used. And I believe I've heard that said by either Jen Mallow or Dan Lubley, one of the two said that. So it's a tricky issue, but again, I would appreciate clarification on where the state exactly is getting their numbers from, because I know that our local is from an FCI score, which is a combination of different factors that they come to, and then they use that to rank who gets what construction and when, and where they fall on the capital budget project list, and so on and so forth. But the state, we still don't know exactly, unless someone does know exactly how they're getting that number and how it can be so very different, even including what Jeremy said about why the extra programs, why it's actually as different as it is. So is there any way the state was going to get back to us, Linda, on that?
They never
I didn't
did.
get any follow up.
I did. Yeah, Vanessa, I did reach out to them and they had a no answer.
They did tell us an answer,
Yeah,
at least partially,
Yes,
when they
have
presented
more
last time.
detail. Yeah.
No, I'm saying that they told us, specifically, the state told us in a prior meeting, that one of the biggest differences with those numbers across elementary, middle, and high school are these programs that are being referenced. You've got the preschool issue with the elementary school and programs, but these programs are in every school. I think what we should do, because we've had a great presentation by Paul, 20 minutes, lots of work you put into it, but I would really like to have some time in the future to actually add some information to that presentation regarding the programs that we would have to expect to be cut to use Maryland, the state rated capacity. We have to know what we're losing in order to consider that. And it is very, very expected by the school system and the public that these programs exist and they're desired and they're wanted, and they're not going to want to be eliminated. And so I think we should list them and know them. I don't mind working on that. I had something else to say, but I don't want to jump out of line. Thanks.
Now, Vanessa was next. Was that all you had to offer, Vanessa, or was there something else?
No, that was it.
Okay. And Jeremy.
Oh, sorry. No, I just haven't lowered my hand from before. So
sorry. And Aaron, sorry. And then Lisa.
Sure, I'll keep this really quick. I think maybe I did a little bit of a disservice earlier tonight. I know we talk a lot about portables and overcrowding at schools, and there's lots of comments about them. I think just something to keep in mind is that it's not just the fact that kids are in portables and whether you think that's bad or good or indifferent, so be it. But it also does just impact the child and the school operations, the day itself. At my child's school, I think they have to have 6 different lunches. So they start lunch at 10:30 for a school day that starts at 9:30. And the last lunch is at 1:30 or 1:45 in the afternoon. So all of, many, many grades at that school then have to have snacks, either in the morning or the afternoon, because the lunches get so skewed kind of throughout the day. So I think there's just other things other than just saying, okay, portables, no portables, but even parent involvement in activities at the school are somewhat curtailed because of capacity issues. So that's my only point. I think, it's more than just the use of portables, but it's the educational experience for both the kids themselves and then the families that want to participate in activities at their child's school.
Thank you. Lisa?
Thank you. The program loss was my biggest point that I thought we have to explore. But the other point I wanted to say was that I wanted to remind folks that when you're looking at various data and studies and documents and enrollment figures that attribute new students to new development, that we have had verified that what new development sourced students means are 1-year-old houses. It's actually 10-month-old houses. And it doesn't carry over to the next year. Every year, however many homes are 10 years old, that's what they're talking about. And I just I just want to make sure that people remember that, because I do think that that is a vast underestimation of saying how much does development contribute to enrollment in the entire school system. We don't know the answer to that. We only know how many each year are from 10-month-old homes, which is two very different things. So I don't think we can rely real heavily on saying this is how many kids are going to come from development next year. We can't. We can't say that one equals the other there. We can't. Thank you.
So Todd, it's approaching 8:30. There are no other items on the agenda, so I just wanted to let you know. If you want, there are more. I think Brent has one more question.
Go right ahead, Brent. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. Data points also to consider, and you guys know this, or maybe you don't know this, but leaving pre-K out of APFO also has a counter to it, so we aren't counting trailers as permanent capacity, so it's depending on your point of view, good or bad. But other things to factor in, pre-K in Howard County is also regional, so there are things serving other school attendance capture areas in individual schools, so you'll have a spike of local school usage in some of them that's attributable to adjacent or nearby schools. And also part of the blueprint for education, there's a requirement for additional pre-K coming up. Doesn't specify whether it's in permanent or relocatable capacity. But if you look over the past few years, Howard County has tried a efficiency gain, moving pre-K kids out of schools to increase their capacity and into trailers, which aren't counted as capacity. And that also has had an effect on things. And also within the blueprint, something to take of note, 50% of the capacity that's supposed to be provided for new pre-K programs is supposed to be outsourced. We're talking the strip malls and everything all up and down Route 1. But also it presents an opportunity for cherry picking particular schools or regions or districts for certain projects and leaving the more expensive ones for the county to take care of. So in this capacity planning effort, when we start looking into pre-K, there are about 7 other factors to take in mind here that are positive, negative, or influential. But if we were to act upon this, those all have to be factored in. And I appreciate you letting me jabber on about that. Thank you.
Is that it for hands up, Linda? No more?
No, I think we're good.
Thanks, everybody. Fantastic discussion. And looking forward to we'll do the next meeting now in person, since we weren't able to do it tonight.
Pending weather, and I'm just going to always keep an eye on that. So the next meeting's the 19th, so hopefully we'll be, fingers crossed, good.
Yeah, I have like a 3-week forward-looking weather app, and it's beautiful that day. So we're in good shape.
You're better than most weather people.
We'll hold you to that, Todd.
Actually, it will be in person, but unfortunately, I will be out of town. So I will be jumping in to the meeting, but I'll be out of town. So, but I will be attending. Unfortunately, I can't join you in person. I think I was really looking forward to tonight being in person, because I think it's about time we all sat around the table again. And now I'm the one who's going to bail on the next meeting, and I apologize, but just the way it goes. I guess when you have volunteers on committee, you get what volunteers can give you, and that's true for me too. So I'll see you all remotely, but we'll see you all in 2 weeks. So with that,
can I interrupt just real quick, Todd? This is Lisa Kenny. I just want to let you know I will also not be around on the 19th. Hopefully, but Jason Linker will be handling all the administrative duties for that evening. So if you happen to get a link from him or an email from him, or if you need to contact him, it is Jason Linker, Lenker. And as always, you can email Linda as well.
Thanks, everybody. Quick motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Any second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Good night. night,
See y'all in
everyone.
2 weeks.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank
Everyone.
you.
Ay, 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 ay.